Ever get that feeling? Like, stuck in line somewhere, paperwork just piling up, DMV maybe.
Yeah, I know that feeling.
It's like, bureaucracy, am I right?
Totally.
But sometimes all that red tape, well, it's actually there for a reason. It's important,
Right.
Like it can really protect us sometimes even when we don't realize it. And you know what? That's exactly why we're doing this deep dive today. We're going to look at something you're interested in. The new guidelines for how you transfer vehicle ownership in the Philippines.
It's important stuff.
Absolutely. And let me tell you, they're not messing around with these new rules.
Yeah.
If you don't follow them, there are some serious consequences.
Big-time consequences.
So I'm glad you're here to kind of break it all down for us. Why don't we start with the why? What made the Philippines Land Transportation Office, the LTO, decide to put their foot down and create these new guidelines?
Well, see, the thing is, for the longest time, it was like the norm to sell vehicles with what they call an open deed of sale.
Okay, so what exactly does that mean? An open deed of sale?
So basically, it meant there wasn't like a clear record of who actually owned the vehicle, like officially.
Wow.
And as you can imagine, that led to, well, a whole bunch of problems.
I bet.
I mean, think about it. You could have multiple people saying, hey, that's my car, or arguments about who's responsible when there's an accident, or if there's a fine,
Yeah, that sounds like a nightmare, actually.
So it was messy, a real mess.
So these new guidelines are basically trying to, prevent all that chaos.
Right, exactly. The LTO is trying to make sure that it's super clear who owns what. It's about protecting both the buyer and the seller.
Makes sense. So what exactly are these new rules? What do people need to know?
Well, the big change is the timeline, like how fast you got to do things.
Okay.
Now, if you're selling your car, you got to report that sale to the LTO within 5 days.
5 days. Got it.
And for the buyer, well, they have 20 days from when they buy the car to make the ownership transfer official, get their name on the registration and all that.
Okay, so 5 days for the seller, 20 days for the buyer. No more, dragging your feet. But what happens if, let's say someone just forgets or just doesn't get around to it? What then?
That's where it gets expensive. Missing those deadlines. Big fine. A big one.
How big are we talking?
$20,000 for both the buyer and the seller.
No way. Both of them get fined.
Both. That's about $350 US.
Ouch. That's a pretty strong motivator to get that paperwork done.
Definitely motivator.
Yeah.
So, let's say you're thinking of buying a used car in the Philippines or selling one. What do you actually have to do to make sure you're following these guidelines?
What are the steps?
Well, it all comes down to the paperwork. You got to have the right documents. First, the official receipt from the sale, obviously. Then the vehicle's registration. It's proof the car's registered with the LTO. And a deed of sale, but it has to be notarized. That legally transfers the ownership.
Okay, so that's 3 things.
Oh, and don't forget valid IDs from both the buyer and the seller.
Okay, so 4 things. Sounds like a lot.
Well, it's better to be safe than sorry, right?
That's true. That's true. Especially with that fine hanging over your head.
Exactly. And honestly, getting all those documents together, it's really a small price to pay for peace of mind.
Sure.
I mean, you really want to make sure everything's done by the book, no headaches down the road,
Right. You definitely don't want to end up in some kind of legal battle over who owns the car or end up being responsible for someone else's unpaid tickets or something.
Exactly.
So, with these stricter guidelines in place now, do you think we'll actually see fewer vehicle-related disputes in the Philippines? It seems like they're really serious about making things more transparent.
It's definitely a step in the right direction. I mean, having those clear records of who owns what, that's crucial for a system to work well. We'll see, I guess, how much of an impact it has.
Yeah, definitely something to keep an eye on.
Yeah.
Well, there you have it, folks. If you're buying or selling a used car in the Philippines, make sure you're up to date on these new rules. Those deadlines and those fines, they're no joke.
Absolutely.
And for everyone else listening, well, it makes you think, doesn't it? Could something like this work in other countries too? Food for thought.
Interesting question.
Thanks so much for joining us for this deep dive. See you next time.
You bet.